At the engagement party, my fiance's father said, "My daughter doesn't marry people from service families." The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor, while my mother's face went completely white. We'd been celebrating for 90 minutes when Richard Ashford tapped his glass and asked for everyone's attention. The string quartet stopped playing. Servers froze mid-pour, and Richard smiled that smile wealthy people wear when they're about to remind everyone of their place. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," he began, his voice carrying through the Ashford estate. "But we need to address something that's been bothering Evelyn and me." He looked directly at me. "David seems like a nice enough young man, hard-working from what I understand, but my daughter doesn't marry people from service families." The words hung in the air like smoke. My father Thomas stood near the buffet, a custodian at Riverside Hospital for 32 years. My mother Anne worked as a housekeeper for 3 wealthy families, and I watched her champagne glass slip from her fingers and explode against the floor in a sound that echoed through the sudden silence. Claire pulled her hand from mine and stepped toward her father, her voice shaking. "Dad, what the hell is this?" But Richard held up his hand, not done with his performance. "Let me finish, Claire. Your mother and I hired an investigator to look into David's background." He pulled out his phone. "David's father has worked as a janitor for 3 decades, never advancing, never showing ambition beyond his station. His mother cleans houses for a living, including, ironically, the home of our friends, the Whitneys." He looked up with something resembling pity. "These are not appropriate in-laws for a woman of your standing." The room erupted. Claire's Aunt Patricia said, "Richard, that's enough," but he raised his voice over the noise. "Furthermore, David works as an assistant property manager, making approximately $48,000 annually. Claire's shoe budget exceeded that figure last year." My mother made a sound between a sob and a gasp. My father's grip on her shoulder tightened, but he didn't move, completely blindsided by this public humiliation. "Mr. Ashford," I started, but he cut me off with a dismissive wave. "I have every right. Claire is my daughter." He reached into his jacket and produced an envelope. "Inside is a check for $250,000. It's yours, David, if you end this engagement tonight and walk away." Claire was crying now, mascara running down her face. "You can't be serious. You can't actually be doing this." Richard's expression softened when he looked at his daughter. "Claire, sweetheart, you'll thank me someday. You're infatuated, but this man is not your equal." What Richard didn't know was that I wasn't just an assistant property manager. I owned Fisher Property Group, a company managing 83 buildings across the city worth $340 million combined. I'd kept my position at our original building because I liked staying connected to operations, knowing how things actually worked. Claire knew everything. We'd agreed to keep it quiet from her family because I wanted them to know me as a person first, not as a bank account. That decision now felt like a catastrophic error. My father finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying through the room. "Mr. Ashford, I've cleaned floors for 32 years, mopped up blood and vomit and things I won't mention in polite company. I've emptied trash and scrubbed toilets and done work people like you don't even see." He was still holding my mother, spine straight, eyes steady on Richard. "My wife has cleaned your friends' homes with pride and dignity. We raised our son to work hard and treat people with respect regardless of their station. You think you're better than us because you were born into money, but you're wrong about everything, including my son." The room went completely silent. "Tell him, son," my father said, looking at me with tired pride. "Tell him what you actually do." Before I could respond, Claire spoke, her voice cutting like a blade. "Dad, shut up and listen. David owns Fisher Property Group. He's worth more than you are. He could buy this house with cash tomorrow." She was shaking now. "He kept his position because he actually cares about good work, not just appearing successful. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? You tried to pay off a man who probably made more this year than you did." Richard's face went through several expressions before settling on disbelief. "That's not possible. Our investigator," but Claire cut him off, "found exactly what David wanted him to find. Because unlike you, David doesn't define himself by wealth." Her brother James stood up beside her. "Dad, you investigated him? This is insane." People were pulling out phones, presumably Googling Fisher Property Group, while Richard struggled to process. "You were right about one thing," I said quietly, and the room settled to hear me. "Claire deserves better. She deserves better than a father who would humiliate her fiancé in front of everyone. She deserves better than parents who hired an investigator instead of getting to know me." I picked up the envelope with the check. "But you were wrong about everything else." I tore the check in half, then quarters, letting pieces fall to the floor. "You can't buy me off because I don't need your money. You can't intimidate me because I don't respect your opinion. And you definitely can't break up this engagement because that's not your decision to make." Claire pulled off the diamond bracelet he'd given her for her birthday. "I'm done, Dad. I'm done making excuses for your snobbery. David and I are getting married with or without your blessing. You can support that, or you can stay here with your contempt for anyone you consider beneath you." James added, "And if you choose the latter, you'll be doing it without me too. What you did tonight was unforgivable." The word landed on Richard like a physical blow. The party dissolved immediately, guests making awkward excuses while shooting glances at Richard standing alone, covered in the birthday cake he'd knocked over when my father's fist connected with his jaw. Dad had lunged across the room at Richard's suggestion that maybe if I'd been meeting his needs at home, Nathan wouldn't have cheated. The pristine white frosting was all over Richard's face and shirt. Claire's Aunt Patricia hugged her hard before leaving. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. My mother was still crying silently while my father maintained that defensive posture, protecting her. Mom, Dad, I'm so sorry, I started, but my father shook his head. You have nothing to apologize for, son. That man showed exactly who he is tonight. My mother touched my face with trembling fingers. Are you sure about marrying into that family? What happens with grandchildren? Holidays? It was a fair question. Claire joined us, still holding my hand. Mr. and Mrs. Fisher, I am so deeply sorry for what my father said. There's no excuse. She was crying again, but her voice stayed steady. But David and I are still getting married, and you will always be welcome in our home. My father doesn't get to dictate our relationships. My mother looked at her for a long moment, then pulled Claire into a hug while they both cried. You're a good girl, my mother finally said, but this won't be easy. His type don't forgive being shown up. We left together, me, Claire, my parents, and James, who announced he wasn't staying there another night. As we were leaving, Richard made one final announcement to the nearly empty room. I'm starting a men's group for anyone who wants to reclaim their masculinity. The only response was the hum of machines and car doors slamming outside. James finally spoke in the car. He's going to try to destroy you. That's what he does when people embarrass him. The next morning proved James right. My phone rang at 6:30 with calls from 3 business partners asking about rumors that Fisher Property Group was under investigation for code violations and tenant harassment. None of it was true, but the rumors were strategic, planted by someone with reach. Richard's first move in what would be a sustained campaign. By week's end, Richard had made his intentions clear through escalating attacks. He'd called in favors to have 3 of my buildings subjected to surprise inspections. He'd spread rumors through his country club that I was financially unstable, causing 2 investors to back out. He'd even contacted my tenants directly, suggesting they should worry about their landlord's questionable practices. Each attack was technically legal, but the pattern was clear. He was trying to destroy my business because I wouldn't let him destroy my relationship. What he didn't understand was that I'd built my company from nothing. His attacks were annoying but not fatal because my business was solid and my tenants actually knew me. James became an unexpected ally, providing intelligence. He's meeting with Lawrence Kensington tomorrow, James warned. Dad's going to try to convince him to blacklist you. Armed with this information, I scheduled my own meeting with Kensington an hour before Richard's appointment. I laid out everything, showed documentation of Richard's sabotage attempts, and explained the situation. Kensington, a 70-year-old who'd built his empire from a construction worker starting point, listened carefully. Men like Richard think money equals character, he said. I've met your father at the hospital where I volunteer. Good man. Better than Richard will ever be. He canceled his meeting with Richard and offered me a partnership on a development project instead. Claire's relationship with her mother deteriorated in stages. Evelyn kept calling, suggesting if David apologized for embarrassing Richard, they could move forward. Apologize for what? Claire asked, voice sharp. For not being poor enough to be grateful for Dad's contempt? When that didn't work, Evelyn suggested postponing the wedding until everyone had perspective. Claire responded by moving the date up 6 months and booking a small venue for 50 instead of the 300-person extravaganza Evelyn had planned. You and Dad are invited if you can behave like decent humans. If not, we'll celebrate without you. Evelyn hung up without responding. The wedding planning became a battleground. Evelyn kept calling vendors making changes without permission. The florist received 2 different orders, Claire's simple wildflowers and Evelyn's elaborate orchids costing triple. The caterer had similar stories. Claire handled it by sending mass emails to every vendor stating that only she and I had authority to make changes, and that communications from Evelyn Ashford should be ignored. This triggered more crying calls from Evelyn about being cut out of her daughter's wedding. You cut yourself out, Mom, Claire said, voice tired. You could have stood up to Dad. You could have told him what he did was wrong. Instead, you made excuses and tried to convince me his behavior was my fault for not choosing the right kind of man. 6 weeks before the wedding, Richard made one absurdly heavy-handed final play. He contacted my largest commercial tenant, a law firm occupying 3 floors, and offered them free rent for a year if they'd break their lease and move to a property he'd purchased specifically for this. The managing partner, Victoria Grayson, called me confused. He's trying to hurt my business, I explained. It's personal. Victoria laughed. Well, he doesn't know me if he thinks I'd break a lease with a professional landlord just because some bitter rich guy wants to play games. Tell him thanks, but no thanks. The wedding itself was small, intimate, and perfect in ways the original plan never would have been. 53 people attended. My parents, Claire's Aunt Patricia and family, James and his girlfriend, close friends, and surprisingly about a dozen tenants from my buildings who I'd invited on impulse. Richard and Evelyn were not there, having made clear through James they wouldn't attend a ceremony they couldn't control. Their absence hurt Claire in ways she tried to hide, but what we had instead was a room full of people who genuinely cared about us. My father walked Claire down the aisle when we realized there was no one else she wanted. The sight of my dad in his best suit offering his arm to my bride while my mother cried happy tears made the engagement party nightmare feel almost worth it. The reception was at a restaurant owned by one of my tenants, Sophia, who insisted on catering at cost because you gave me a break on rent when my husband was sick. Victoria Grayson stood up unsolicited and told a story about how I personally came to her office at 10 p.m. on a Friday to fix a heating problem. That's who David is, she said, raising her glass. He doesn't hide behind managers. He shows up and does the work. Claire, you're marrying someone who understands that character is measured in actions, not status. We honeymooned in Portugal. 2 weeks of intentionally not checking phones except emergencies. When we returned, a letter waited from Evelyn. Pages of handwriting explaining how she'd spent 32 years deferring to Richard's judgment, how disagreeing with him publicly only made things worse, how she'd chosen wrong when it came to defending her daughter. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," it concluded, "but I'm asking for a chance to know my daughter again, to meet her husband properly, to maybe earn back a fraction of the relationship I threw away by being a coward when it mattered most." Claire read it 3 times, cried through the second reading, then set it aside without responding. "I need time," she told me. "I need to figure out if I can trust her, if she's actually changed, or if this is manipulation." Richard never apologized, never acknowledged wrongdoing. According to James, who maintained minimal contact, Richard convinced himself he'd been right all along, and Claire would eventually realize her mistake and come crawling back once the novelty of playing house with the janitor's son wears off. The first year of marriage was hard navigating holidays and celebrations, deciding who's invited and who's not. Claire spent Thanksgiving and Christmas with her Aunt Patricia, conspicuously missing her parents while checking her phone repeatedly like maybe they'd call. They didn't. They spent both holidays at the country club maintaining the fiction that everything was fine. My business continued growing despite Richard's sabotage attempts because his influence was limited to certain circles, and I deliberately built outside those circles. I focused on mixed-income housing, properties serving community needs rather than maximizing profit. Richard saw this as evidence of my unsuitability. "He's running a charity, not a business," James reported him saying. My parents remained my most reliable advisors, my father especially understanding maintenance and operations in ways my MBA never taught. Claire found a new position at a smaller investment firm that hired her for her Yale degree and track record, not her family name. She took a pay cut but gained autonomy, thriving in an environment where she was valued for skills. Her boss, Rachel Park, who'd built her firm from nothing, became a mentor. "Your father thinks money equals intelligence," Rachel told Claire. "But the hardest thing in finance is admitting when you're wrong, adjusting course, learning from mistakes. People born into wealth rarely develop that skill because they can always buy their way out." Evelyn made several more reconciliation attempts over the next 2 years, each following the same pattern. She'd reach out, suggest coffee, promise she'd changed. Claire would agree cautiously. For 30 minutes, everything seemed fine. Then Evelyn would pivot, suggesting maybe enough time had passed that they could all sit down together, that Richard had mellowed and misses his daughter. Claire would point out it wasn't one mistake but a pattern. Evelyn would make excuses about Richard being a product of his generation. Claire would end the meeting and not respond to text for 6 months. The turning point came year 3 when Claire discovered she was pregnant. We'd been trying for 6 months when she took a test on a random morning and it was positive. Joy was immediate and overwhelming. Then reality crashed in when she realized she had to decide whether to tell her parents. "They should know," she cried in our bathroom. "I hate that they should know. I hate that I even care, but this is their grandchild and I can't hide that forever." We discussed for hours and decided Claire would tell Evelyn, but make clear any involvement was conditional on Richard acknowledging what he did and apologizing sincerely. The call happened on a weekend morning, me beside Claire on our couch for support. The conversation started carefully, Claire delivering the news and Evelyn's joy coming through loud enough I could hear it. Then Claire laid out her terms, and Joy transformed. "You're using your child as leverage?" Evelyn's voice was sharp, accusatory. "No, Mom. I'm protecting my child from a grandfather who thinks people's worth is measured by what their parents do for a living. Tell Dad that if he wants to meet his grandchild, he needs to apologize to David and his parents for what he said. Not vague. Sorry if anyone was offended, but real acknowledgement that what he did was wrong. If he can do that, we can talk. If he can't, he's made his choice." The call ended without resolution. Richard's response arrived via email a week later, forwarded through Evelyn. The email acknowledged that tensions ran high, and perhaps some comments could be interpreted as insensitive. He expressed hope they could move past this misunderstanding and focus on the future. Claire read it once, showed me, then responded with a single line. "Thank you for confirming I made the right decision." Our daughter was born on a rainy October morning, 7 pounds 3 ounces of perfect humanity. We named her Anna Marie, after both our mothers, honoring women who showed us unconditional love rather than family that made love conditional. My mother cried learning the name, holding her granddaughter and whispering in Spanish about how beautiful she was. My father seemed struck speechless, just sitting holding Anna and staring like she was the most precious thing he'd ever encountered. They stayed hours past visiting restrictions, and nurses didn't say anything because they could see this was a family that knew how to love without conditions. Evelyn called when she learned of the birth, asking to visit, but Claire said no. "Not until Dad apologizes. That's still the condition. My daughter deserves better than a grandfather who thinks some people are less valuable based on family background." When Anna was 8 months old, James called. He was getting married and wanted both Richard and Claire at the wedding, meaning our first unavoidable family confrontation since the engagement party. Claire agonized for weeks but finally decided to attend with clear boundaries. We'd arrive just before the ceremony, sit opposite from Richard and Evelyn, leave immediately after reception if there was drama. James agreed gratefully. The day arrived and we dressed Anna in her best outfit. The ceremony was at a garden venue and we arrived exactly 5 minutes before start time. We saw them across the garden, Richard looking older, hair more gray, posture less commanding. Evelyn spotted us immediately, her face doing something complicated. Joy at seeing Claire and Anna mixed with awareness she couldn't just rush over. During the reception, Evelyn approached our table where we were feeding Anna mashed banana. "She's beautiful," Evelyn said, voice thick with emotion. "May I hold her?" Claire looked at me, then her mother, and something softened. Just for a minute. She passed Anna to Evelyn, who immediately teared up while cradling her granddaughter. Richard appeared then, standing feet away like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to approach. He looked at Anna, then Claire, then me, and I saw uncertainty in his expression. "Could we talk?" he asked. "Privately, just for a few minutes, please." We followed Richard to a quiet garden corner while Evelyn stayed with Anna. Richard cleared his throat, ran a hand through gray hair, and for the first time looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I owe you both an apology," he started, words sounding rusty, unpracticed. "What I said at your engagement party was cruel and classist and inexcusable. I humiliated your parents, David, and tried to destroy your relationship because I couldn't see past my own prejudices and pride." He paused, struggling. "I've spent 3 years watching my daughter build a life without me. I've missed your wedding, your first year of marriage, the birth of my granddaughter, all because I couldn't admit I was wrong. Evelyn kept telling me to apologize. James stopped speaking to me for 8 months. Even my friends started asking what I'd done, but I was too stubborn, too convinced I'd been right about you." He looked at me directly. "I was wrong. You've built something impressive, but more than that, you've been a good husband and father. That has nothing to do with where you came from or what your parents do. It has to do with character, which I lost sight of somewhere." Claire let him finish, then spoke carefully. "Do you understand why what you said was so harmful? Not just to David, but to his parents?" Richard nodded slowly. "I do, and I need to apologize to them as well if they'll give me the chance." This surprised me. "They're here," I said, "at the wedding. My father's by the bar, my mother's with Anna and your wife." Richard's face did something complicated. "Now?" There was something vulnerable in the question. Claire answered, "Yes, now. If you mean this, you need to face everyone you hurt." We walked back to where my parents now sat with Evelyn and Anna. My father's expression hardened seeing Richard approach. My mother instinctively moved closer to her granddaughter, protective. Richard stopped a respectful distance away. "Mr. and Mrs. Fisher, I owe you an apology 3 years overdue. What I said at my daughter's engagement party was reprehensible. I judged your worth based on professions instead of character, and I said things that were cruel and classist and completely wrong." His voice wavered. "You raised an incredible son who's been better to my daughter than I had any right to hope for. The fact he's also successful in business is irrelevant compared to how he treats Claire with respect and partnership. I'm sorry for what I said, and I'm sorry it took 3 years." My father stared at Richard for a long moment. Then he stood and extended his hand. "My son loves your daughter. They have a beautiful child together. Life is too short for old men to waste time on grudges." Richard took his hand, relief flooding his face. My mother was less forgiving, expression guarded, but she accepted his apology with a nod and terse, "Thank you for saying so." It wasn't warmth or forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. Claire threw her arms around Richard and they both cried while the rest of us looked away. The aftermath marked a slow thaw in family relationships, though trust had to be rebuilt from nothing. Richard and Evelyn started showing up to family events Claire's Aunt Patricia hosted. First gatherings were awkward, everyone monitoring their words. Richard made visible effort, asking my father about hospital work, expressing interest in my mother's business, engaging about property management without bringing up class. He wasn't great at it. Decades of prejudice don't disappear overnight, but he was trying. The first time Richard held Anna, he was stiff and nervous, but when she grabbed his finger and smiled, something in his face softened. "She's perfect," he told Claire. "You did good." Rebuilding took years. There were setbacks when Richard's old attitudes slipped through in comments about those kinds of neighborhoods, or questions about why I'd invest in lower-income housing instead of maximizing profits. Each time Claire or James called him out, and Richard usually caught himself, apologized, tried to do better. My mother remained hardest to win over, her politeness never quite warming into friendliness. She was the one who'd dropped that champagne glass, stood there while someone mocked her life's work, watched her son's engagement party turn into public humiliation. Some wounds don't heal just because someone says sorry 3 years late. 5 years after that engagement party, we host Christmas at our house. A real house now, purchased with combined success, filled with furniture my father built and photos of Anna at every stage. Richard and Evelyn arrive with presents. My parents arrive with food. James and his wife bring their baby daughter. We somehow manage the evening without incident. Richard has learned when to stay quiet. My father has learned to accept Richard's presence without tension, if not warmth. Evelyn and my mother discover shared interest in gardening, spending an hour discussing perennials, finding common ground in something unrelated to class or ancient grievances. Anna plays with her cousin, oblivious to complicated history hanging over adult interactions. Maybe that's the point. Maybe that's healing, when the next generation doesn't carry the weight of our mistakes. The potato salad that splattered across the Ashford estate has become family legend the moment everything changed. Before the potato salad or after the engagement party marked the divide between who we were and who we've become. Claire jokes she should have thrown it at her father instead of dropping it. While she laughs, I see remaining hurt in her eyes. Some wounds scar over but never fully disappear. She has a relationship with her parents now, but it's different, built on boundaries and consequences rather than blind acceptance. She sees them regularly but on her terms, at neutral locations or our house, rarely at the estate holding too many memories of being dismissed. Richard has learned to accept this, to be grateful for whatever access he gets rather than demanding the deference he'd once considered his right. My business continues growing, now managing over 120 buildings, and I still maintain my position at the original property. It drives Richard crazy, this refusal to fully embrace lifestyle my wealth could afford. But he's starting to understand that for me, success isn't about status. My parents retired last year, and I'd convinced them to let me buy them a small house where they don't worry about rent or repairs. My father still consults on my buildings occasionally. My mother has become unofficial grandmother to several tenant families needing childcare help. They're living the retirement they earned through decades of hard work. Claire thrives in her career, having made partner through merit. She mentors younger women, particularly those from working-class backgrounds facing the classism she witnessed. She's turned her experience into purpose, using her platform to challenge old boys' networks keeping certain people out of certain rooms. Richard attends one of her speaking engagements, sitting in back while she presents about diversity and inclusion in investment banking. After, he tells her he's proud, and she thanks him but doesn't quite smile. They both understand pride offered too late doesn't erase years of conditional love. Anna starts kindergarten, and other parents have no idea about complicated family history that brought her into existence. She's just a happy 5-year-old who loves art class and has strong opinions about sandwich shapes, unburdened by weight of her grandfather's conflict or class tensions that nearly prevented her parents' marriage. Sometimes I watch her interact with both sets of grandparents and marvel at how she's become the bridge connecting these families who started in such different places. Maybe we'll tell her someday when she's old enough to understand nuance and forgiveness and complicated work of loving imperfect people. Or maybe we'll let her discover it gradually, piecing together family history from overheard comments and old photos and occasional slips when someone references before the engagement party. The story doesn't have neat ending because real life rarely does. Richard still says insensitive things occasionally, revealing prejudices he was raised with. My mother still stiffens when he's around, carrying memory of public humiliation. Claire still grieves the relationship with her parents she thought she had before learning they'd hired an investigator. I still carry anger from that moment Richard announced my parents' professions made me unworthy, still channeling it into building a business treating every person with dignity. We're all scarred, all changed in visible and hidden ways. But we're all still here, still trying, still choosing connection over easy separation, still believing family can be rebuilt even after destruction. At Thanksgiving, Richard makes a surprising toast. I want to thank David and Claire for patience with a stubborn old man who had to learn difficult lessons about what actually matters. I want to thank Thomas and Anne for raising a son who had every right to walk away but chose to stay and fight for his relationship. And I want to thank all of you for showing me that wealth and status mean nothing compared to character and integrity. He pauses, voice catching. 5 years ago, I said something unforgivable at an engagement party. My daughter dropped potato salad and I thought I was watching her throw away her future. Instead, I was throwing away my chance to be part of it. Thank you all for letting me earn my way back. The room is quiet after the toast, everyone processing this rare vulnerability from a man who built his life on never showing weakness. Then my father stands, raises his glass, and says simply, "To family, the one we're born into and the one we choose. May we always know the difference. If you're still here, you're a true fan. Show some support with a like and subscribe to catch the next one."